Richard Bliss Brooke here. We are live.
We sit here today with none other than
Mark Victor Hansen,
Bob Proctor.
This is Kendra Hall.
Tanya Stringer.
Jeff Canfield.
Whit Jones.
James Clear.
Les Brown.
People want to hear stories. I like getting stories out of my guests here, so thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, Richard Brooke here with another episode of The Authentic Networker. Today I have the incredible Terry Jones with me. Terry's a serial entrepreneur, a best-selling author, and proven innovator and digital disruptor. He started out as a travel agent and spent 10 years in product marketing at American Airlines. He later became their chief information officer. Then he co-founded within American Airlines Travelocity and became their CEO, which he led from a team of 6 to a $3 billion public company. He also co-founded kayak.com and was their chairman for 7 years until it was sold to Priceline for $1.8 billion. We're going to be hearing all about Terry's ideas on disruption and innovation today. So let's get this thing off the ground. Hey, everybody, Richard here. And I've got somebody I've been chasing for a little bit. He didn't know I was chasing him, but I've been chasing him in my mind for, maybe at least a year. Wow, wouldn't it be amazing if I could get this guy in one of my interviews? I want to introduce you all to Terry Jones. Hello, Terry. Welcome to the Authentic Networker podcast.
Richard, it's great to be with you.
Thank you. You have really an amazing career, Terry. And one of the things I've done in the last week has been diving into your books. This one, great. I got pretty well all the way through it. I love how it's laid out. It's super inspiring. And I haven't got into disruption yet, but we'll talk about those books. I want to dive into your career at Travelocity and Kayak and everything you're doing now. But I want to start with, who was Terry Jones as a kid? And I'm particularly curious, Terry, about your parents and how they raised you to have such a brilliant, can-do, innovative attitude about life and business.
Well, I was blessed to have terrific parents, and my brother is also very successful. And my brother DeWitt, who ended up being a National Geographic photographer, he was always the guy who got straight A's, was the president of student council, went to Dartmouth, very, very successful, got into Harvard Business School, didn't go, went to UCLA. And became this Academy Award-winning photographer. I was always the guy who got either A's or F's. If I didn't like it, I didn't do it, and I didn't want to be him. So we were very different as kids, but I credit my mom a lot for making me very curious. She loved to read, and she took me to the library a lot, and she read to me, and I became a reader. I'm blind in one eye, and I've always been a little overweight, so I was never a sports person very well. I was okay at football. I could block, but that was about it. And so I became a reader, and I became very curious. And my dad was an advertising guy, so we got about 40 magazines a month for free because they were all trying to get his business. And I read everything from the Saturday Evening Post to Successful Farming. It didn't matter what it was. I'd read it. And it gave me this breadth of experience and curiosity, which I think helped me a lot. My dad was kind of, today, I think he'd be called a maker. He was a ham radio operator and had learned that when he was 12. And so I helped him build the radios with Heathkits and stereos and stuff learned a lot about electronics. We were skiers, so we worked on our own ski equipment. We built his radio towers in the backyard. We built go-karts, and that kind of got me into building things. We always had something going on. So I think they gave me a broad set of knowledge. Another thing, my brother and I went to the same camp in Canada, as did my great good friend Jeff, who I'm with this weekend. And my dad wanted to go to that camp as a kid, but his family couldn't afford it. And one of the reasons we moved back to Chicago was he wanted us to go to this camp. I went there for 12 summers. It was a canoeing camp in Canada. It really tested me and pushed me. I loved being out in the woods. I loved doing that canoeing. And now I'm chairman of the board of a camp very similar to the one I went to. And actually, a couple of years ago, we bought the old camp that I went to, and that's part of our portfolio. So I'm kind of back in camping after 50 years, and we service about 1,000 kids a summer, and it's very tough canoe trips in the wilderness. It's great for kids, and I love being part of it, and that helped shape my life.
I had a similar fortunate experience for, I think, 3 or 4 years. I went to Bob Mathias High Sierra Boys Camp, and he was a Olympic decathlon.
I remember.
Yeah, and DeWitt told me that story, Terry, about you circling back. You didn't just buy the camp that influenced your life; you saved it. And
well, yeah, it was going down, and it was owned by a former camper, and so another guy and I raised $1 million and from donors, and gave money ourselves and saved it, and then we donated it to this other camp. So they now have it, and this is the first summer, was to be the first summer it's in operation, although we can't get to Canada. So right. I think there's a real place for that. I'm excited to have it back.
So Terry, how did you end up? I mean, travel is where you've made a huge mark, and we'll get into that. But how did you end up? I think you started as a travel agent, right?
Yeah,
an actual travel agent.
Crazy story. I was a history major in college. I had no idea what I was going to do, except I was pretty sure I was going to Vietnam because I had a very low draft number, 1970. They were still taking lots of us over there, and I got rejected from the draft because of my eyes. And so then I didn't know at all what to do. And my college roommate's dad was a pilot for Trans World Airlines. And for those of the audience who don't know, it was the second biggest airline in the world. And he said, I have a free pass. So I'm spending the next year going around the world because after that, I'm going to get my PhD and I'll lose the pass. So another guy and I said, well, we thought we were going to the Army. We don't have jobs. We'll go with you. So we spent a year going around the world. In those days, you could buy an around the world ticket for $1,000. Wow. We lived on $5 a day, pretty much everywhere, camped out, stayed in hostels, visited, 35 countries. It was awesome. And when I make graduation speeches, I recommend it all the time because it just opens your mind to the rest of the world, even more important now than 50 years ago. When I got back, I told my dad, I want to get in the travel business. I think maybe I should be a travel agent. He's like, geez, I sent you to college. So I went to school at night. I got a day job and went to school at night to Evelyn Eccles Travel School because in those days you had to write tickets by hand. You had to compute the fares yourself. It was a very different world. And I got hired at a travel agency in Chicago. I was the only person who spoke English as a native language. Everybody else was the Russian desk, the Polish desk, the Caribbean desk. I was the receptionist. And I said, where'd you learn your English? I said, well, here, actually.
Chicago.
And 6 months in, my manager, who ran the Russian desk, said, I've got a backer. Let's go open our own company. So it was my first startup at 21. He was a Korean guy, Korean American. He'd always told the Russians that he was Hawaiian because Russia and Korea, after the Korean War, didn't get on. So when we started the business, he said, you have to go to Moscow and negotiate this contract. There were only 4 travel agencies in the US at that time appointed to do business with Russia. We wanted to be the 5th. I said, why can't you go? He said, well, I kind of told him I was Hawaiian. So I went, and they, of course, said, where's Charles? And I had to explain, and I cooled my heels for a week and finally got into negotiating. We got the deal. And 5 years later, we had the 50th largest travel agency in the US. So that was my intro to the travel business.
All right. And then transition that. How do you end up at American Airlines?
Well, what happened was we computerized. Travel agents were just getting reservation computers because pricing for airlines had been deregulated. So everybody before that, and those you may remember this, had the same price. Suddenly prices were different. There was price competition. And so the airlines sold the computers to travel agents so we could figure all this out because prices were changing every hour. And we got a back office computer as well to do ticketing and reporting for corporations. And we were groundbreaking in that regard. I got into computing, and 5 years in, I was a little tired of this travel agency thing. And my boss was bringing more of his family members into the business. I said, okay, I'm going to do something else. So I jumped to this computing company doing both sales and installation and training people in accounting and how to use these mini computers, that had 5 megabyte disks and very powerful. And 6 months into that job, our company was sold to American Airlines.
Oh.
So now it was part of American, and this is quite instructive. Rob Crandall, who went on to be chairman, was then VP of marketing, and he came down, he bought us, and he said, I'm going to banish anyone from American from coming to see this company for 2 years because we will kill you. We like you, but we're too big. And I'm going to send a CFO. I want to watch my money, and that's it. 2 years later, they said, okay, now you're ready. You understand budgets. Some of you bought ties. I wouldn't shave, but other than that. And they moved us to Dallas. And when they moved us to Dallas and integrated, the founder of the company wouldn't move. He had it in his contract. He didn't have to. So I became the CEO of this division and started my 24-year career at American Airlines.
And that division ended up being like the IT division of
actually, it's an interesting story. American was really one of the first to, and is a Harvard business case of automating your sales channel. So we automated the travel agents with our computer system called SABRE, right. Heavily modified it. And I was part of the SABRE division, which was in marketing. We contracted our services to IT, but I became the head of product marketing. So I was doing all the product design of these computer products for the travel agents because I knew travel, I knew what they needed. And we had to change the reservation system a lot. We had to add hotels, we had to add cars, we had to do international fares, we had to have other airlines. But the way the system was designed and the reason they were selling it was if you said, I want to go from Dallas to New York, well, you would see American. You might see United on page 27.
Right.
And United's system, of course, worked to their benefit. Eventually, the Justice Department sued us for antitrust. They said, well, you can't list things that way. We said, it's our system. They said, you can't do that. And we said, it's alphabetical order. And that didn't work for United, it worked for us. So we lost that case.
I love that.
but by that time, we had 40,000 travel agents around the world on this system. And they said, you can charge for people to be in it. So overnight, we were $1 billion business. So there's a great quote that says, if the startup gets the distribution before the incumbent gets the innovation, the startup wins. And in that case, was a land grab. So we're in this multi-billion-dollar business. I got moved to run product marketing, and I did that for a few years. And then my boss, who at that time was also the CIO, said, I want you to go run 500 programmers. I said, I don't know anything about that. He said, you'll do fine. Go do that. So I was terrified. I went over there and, taught him a lot of things, I hope, and I learned a lot of things. And after 3 years of doing that, he said, well, I want you to go run computer operations. That was 2,000 people, a $350 million budget. I said, I don't know anything about computer ops. Oh, yeah, you'll be fine. So I did that for 3 years, lost my hair running those computer systems, and then became CIO. And we actually spun the computer division out of American and took it public as SABRE because it was a multi-billion-dollar business, I think 4 billion maybe at that time. Well, what happened was I was CIO. It was sort of a lousy job. It was like conducting an orchestra where they all hated you, and it was just difficult. And I did it for a while. And we'd had an online product called Easy Sabre that was on CompuServe and Prodigy and those networks, AOL. We'd had it for several years. You could make a reservation, but you couldn't buy a ticket. You still had to buy the ticket from the travel agent because travel agents were our customers. And one day the travel agents woke up and said, you should turn that off. You're selling bullets to the enemy. And Crandall, the boss, said, no, let's just hide it over in IT. We'll give it to Jones. He used to be a travel agent. He'll know what to do with it. So I had it over there, and I didn't exactly hide it. The first thing I said is, why isn't it on the internet? And so we put it on the internet. That became Travelocity, started to grow. And I said, I'd like to go do that. Can I do that instead of being CIO? And everybody said, well, you're nuts. It's only like 15 people, and you're running this huge organization. I said, no, I think it'll be interesting and fun and big. So I did. I resigned as CIO, went over to do that. And I ran it for 6 years. We spun it out, took it public. It became a $1.2 billion IPO.
That's enough of a success story. But
Well,
then,
and in that
then you
book,
have to make
in
Go ahead.
on innovation, I should tell the listeners, is really the story of that. And it talks about intrapreneurship, which is very different than entrepreneurship. I've done VC-backed startups as well, and this is quite different. You know, how do you keep the corporation from killing you is really what the book is about.
You know, a lot of credit to Crandall for creating an environment to nurture that and empowering you to nurture it and giving you the green lights.
Yeah, he really provided the air cover, as did Max Hopper, my direct boss, to let us grow, because we were in direct competition with the rest of the business.
Right.
They didn't like that, and we were losing tons of money. And at one point, we even had a debate, an actual sort of Harvard debate, pro and con, keep Travelocity, sell Travelocity. I was not allowed to participate. Thankfully, keeping Travelocity won. And years later, I asked my boss, what would you have done if we lost? And he said, well, I would have found some way to keep it, but this way we got all the baloney out on the table and people stopped bitching. We had all decided as a team to keep it. And that's really important to do, because otherwise people are sneaking around and they're trying to knife you here and there. And I had to move out of the building to build my own culture. I had a separate budget. We had a separate dress code. We did a lot of things. I put a sign up in front of the building that said Travelocity. And I got a call one day from the facilities people. They said, you can't have a sign. No divisions have their own sign. All American Airlines. I said, but nobody can find us. We're over here in this strip mall. No. So I ignored them. And about a week later, this guy came with a hacksaw and he sawed it down. And we had no sign. But that was the day they were spreading concrete in the parking lot, resurfacing. So I sent one of my artists out, and they drew this huge Travelocity logo about 20 feet long in the concrete. And then it set, so they couldn't do anything after it was there. What does Steve Jobs say? It's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy.
Yes.
We were pirates.
So I don't know how long ago it was. You'll know exactly, but I'm going to guess it was 10 years ago. I personally had a breakthrough in my own travel, Terry. I've always had my EA do my travel, but there's always this, back and forth between us on email. What about these flights? What about those flights? And I micromanage my travel. I'm like, oh yes, don't make me sit in an airport for 4 hours. And I don't even like going the wrong direction, right? If I'm going East Coast to West Coast, I don't want to deviate. I don't want to go backwards. It's a feng shui thing. I don't know. Price is not the most important thing. The right equipment and the right schedule, that's the most important thing. And I don't know when it was, about 10 years ago, probably because at that time, not so much today, but at that time I used to read like 50 magazines a month. Interesting. And I think I found it in a magazine, this app called Kayak, and I immediately downloaded it and started playing with it. And it was a tremendous breakthrough in my own personal travel, because what it allowed me to do is I could send her, hey, here's what I'm looking for, this kind of route. And so she started using Kayak, and then she would send me, here's 3 options, and saved a lot of time and energy and heartache on travel. Nothing worse than being on a long trip and you're stuck with a nightmare you can't unravel. People paying attention to your introduction know you are also the founder of Kayak. How did that happen?
Well, I'm a co-founder. What happened was Travelocity eventually got bought back by SABRE. They thought it was too important to their future to leave it public, because I was running the public company for the shareholders, not for them. So I would do things they didn't like. So they bought it back, and I decided they were going to screw it up and I better leave. They did, because they later sold it for $280 million. And I told you it went public for $1.2 billion. So they destroyed $1 billion of value by putting finance back in finance, sales back in sales. Nobody was nimble anymore. And they're fighting against, Expedia, which was owned by Microsoft and then spun out, and Priceline. So they weren't nimble enough. And so I left. So I was looking for what to do. I became a public speaker. My brother got me into that. I joined a lot of boards. I've now served on 20 corporate boards. And I was working at a VC firm and looking for travel investments. And we said, I had been on the board of Overture, which was one of the very first search companies we sold to Yahoo. We said, well, why isn't there vertical search for travel? Just search. Because Travelocity was converting about 5% of arrivals into sales. That means 95% of the people were buying somewhere else. That's kind of normal in e-commerce. But we found a lot of those people were using us as a directory and then going right to the airlines.
Right.
So we said, why don't we build a site that does that just searches everything. But when you click, you can buy an American or you can buy a Priceline. It's up to you where you buy. We're just a search and we will charge them a click-through fee like Google. So we found a company that did that. We were going to buy them, but we didn't like their management and their IT wasn't that great. And the VC, Joel Cutler, General Catalyst, said, I'll fund it. Let's do it. So he went out and found Steve Hafner, the CEO, and Paul English, the CTO, and I became chairman of the board. And it was an 8-year terrific ride. The CTO, brilliant guy, designed that interface that you see, which is so fast, so flexible. And it did an interesting thing. We didn't have a phone bank for complaints because search companies don't, but we did get emails. And all the emails went right to the engineers. We didn't have customer service. Now, you might say, well, they're expensive. They're wasting their time. No, our slogan was give the pain to the people who cause the pain. Right? So it's a very short feedback loop. And when we rolled out mobile, we thought that mobile would be about next flight out or a hotel for tonight. My speech ran over, whatever. Turned out not to be true. People were using mobile just like the desktop. But back then in the early days of mobile, no one knew that. So if we hadn't had those short feedback loops, if we hadn't listened, we wouldn't have 65 million people using that app today. So it was a terrific ride. You know, I was chairman, so I wasn't there every day, but I got to give a lot of input. And we eventually took the company public. And Priceline had wanted to buy us before we were public, but we couldn't agree on a price. So we went public, and then there was no argument. It was like 30% over the stock price. And that was $1.8 billion. So that was a terrific exit as well.
That's a pretty good run from the canoe camp, Terry.
Yeah.
One of the quotes that I enjoyed in your book was, I'll paraphrase it, that the only thing that's evolving faster than technology is customers' expectations.
Yes. So what's interesting is, and my book, Disruption Off, talks about this. It's not only innovation in technology, it's innovation in business models. I mean, who would think that you could create $1 billion company by getting people to subscribe for razors?
Right.
Right? Or Philips Technology just went to Schiphol Airport and said, we're not going to sell you light bulbs anymore. We want to sell you light. Everyone said, what? And we want a 20-year contract to light the airport. And they have the data now to do that. Of course, they put in longer lasting bulbs and cheaper bulbs, and they recycle the bulbs, and they pay for the power. And they have, so what do they sell? An outcome.
Right.
Lots of companies are now selling outcome. GE Engines is selling how much uptime do you want? Much more profitable than selling iron. Right. So part of innovation today is saying, well, am I going to be a platform, a subscription, an outcome? And, you know, Kayak, all we were was a thin layer between the customer and the supplier that was better than what they had. And we got the distribution before they got the innovation. Everybody now has filters, but we did it first.
Yep. And because I think that's so brilliant, that quote about consumers' expectations, the consumer demand for technology it's all pent up. And so when somebody nails a better way to do something, there's this instant uptake into the consumer demand because they're so ready for it.
Well, it's not only that, and I agree with you totally, but look at Tesla. Did you like the last Tesla ad you saw? Wasn't it cool? You've never seen a Tesla ad, right? They have intensely loyal fans, and it's mostly because of the user interface of the car.
Right.
You know, when I sit in the car, the door closes, the car's ready to go. And if I'm in a garage, it knows they have to go backwards. I mean, they just look, you know, at the end point of the consumer and design the car that way because it's all software. And the other point about it is that is a cloud connected car. So therefore, they not only are watching what I do, but they're improving it every couple of months.
Right.
So now, you know, John Deere has cloud connected tractors. They don't have to wait for the annual convention to ask the tractor dealer, what's going on in Iowa with the farmers this year? They know every minute, and they can re-delight the customer because they know what the customer's doing.
Yeah.
So cloud is about instant learning from your customers. And if you add AI to that, the AI is learning 24/7, 365. So if you have an AI and your competitor doesn't, he's never going to catch you because he can't learn that fast.
Right. So tell us about your books. Which one did you write first, Off or Innovation?
I wrote On Innovation first, and that's what I was speaking about at the time. It's an unusual format, as you said. It's 72 three-page chapters.
I
So
love
it's
it.
short form media. It's what we're used to today. You can read it front to back, back to front. It's a cookbook. It really talks about culture and team and idea selection and idea generation with a lot of examples. And it also goes through the whole example of entrepreneurship. And then, I started listening as a speaker, and more people are talking about digital transformation and digital disruption. So I thought, okay, let's write a book on disruption. I've got a speech, and I wrote my speech basically. Disruption Off is the book, same format, short form media. It goes through 10 technologies from AI to cloud to drones to big data to 3D printing, and gives you industry examples. Then it talks about business models, and then it talks about what to do. How can I avoid being disrupted or become a disruptor myself? And the number one thing I talk to companies about is take more risk. The problem is that every company was founded by a risk taker. But once it gets big and you got to do the quarterly earnings, let's not try this. Let's not rock the boat. We'll just stay the way we are. Well, you can't, particularly not today. I mean, the companies that will succeed coming out of COVID are the ones who transform themselves during COVID, because the world changed.
Yeah.
My new speech, I tried out yesterday. If you've seen the play Hamilton, Jefferson comes back and has a wonderful song, What Did I Miss? Because he was gone for 7 years. Right? Well, my speech is, what did I miss during COVID? Did you miss the fact that Shell announced peak oil? They're not going to pump as much anymore. And they're installing 50,000 car chargers, electric. GM announced the end of the internal combustion engine. Tesla's worth more than every other car company combined, right? Did you miss that the FAA approved drone delivery or telehealth, right? I mean, there's a lot of did you miss that happened that if you didn't get up with it, keep up with it, you're going to be in trouble coming out of COVID.
Speaking of COVID, you're doing some top secret. It can't be that top secret. I learned about it. COVID visa stuff. Tell us about that. Whatever you can tell us
I've
about.
been just as a travel person trying to get travel started again. And worldwide, every country is going to require some proof of testing or vaccination. Now, we've had the yellow vaccination card for those of us who travel the world for years. This is just a digital version of it because in these days, it's too easy to copy a piece of paper. So every country is going to have it except the US. The federal government said no. 13 states have said they're terrible, they're tyranny, they're awful. They're not. They're just the same thing that your kid has to do when he goes to school, is to prove he's been vaccinated. Now, the best statement I heard about him was from an English ethicist who said they should be used for international travel. They shouldn't be used to get a bottle of milk. I agree with that. Somewhere in between is the line. So in Israel and Denmark, they're using them. Well, Israel's using them for restaurants. That's relatively rare. Denmark's using them for museums and for concerts. France is using them for concerts and sporting events. New York is using them for sporting events. And the NFL is going to use them, which I think will change a bunch of people's mind because they're saying, hey, I don't want 10,000 people in my stadium. I want 30,000. So if they've been vaccinated or tested, I can pack them in and make more money.
How do you deal, Terry, with the segment of the population that for, could be religious beliefs or their own personal convictions, or in my wife's case, her doctor advises she should not be vaccinated because of a reaction she had. How do you accommodate the segment of the population that no matter what Fauci says, they've got Fauci fatigue. They're not going to get vaccinated no matter what.
So that's why it in general won't be used in the US for, we're not going to do the restaurant thing. But for example, yesterday I was speaking to meeting planners, and in large meetings, it's fairly simple. You just have a hybrid meeting. Say, look, if we're going to close down and say it's only tested and vaccinated people because we want to have 10,000 and you can't come either because you chose not to get vaccinated or you can't, join us virtually.
Yeah.
And eventually that'll be over. It's not forever. It's just like, hey, we couldn't have meetings at all 6 months ago. So
Right.
it's a transition to something bigger. But traveling abroad, they don't really care. Your wife just isn't going to be able to go until COVID is over. She's not going to be able to go. If she's not vaccinated. Now, she can get tested. And in some countries, that's enough. But most are saying if you're tested, you still have to quarantine for 2 weeks because the testing doesn't.
So you spend your 2 weeks vacation quarantine.
Exactly. So you're going to be traveling in the US. Every cruise ship, every cruise line right now, except for Carnival, has already said you have to be vaccinated to cruise. And they have to do that because people are terrified to go on a cruise ship. So they're willing to trade off. And most of their customers are over 50. And now, a tremendous percentage of people in the US over 50 have been vaccinated. So they're just going to have to do that for a while to get people to come back, because otherwise I wouldn't go on a cruise ship. And I want to know everybody around me has been vaccinated too, because the cruise ship is like a petri dish. So we're just going to have to put up with some of this. Somebody asked me yesterday, well, I'm vaccinated, my husband is, but my kids aren't. Can I go to Europe? No, you can't. Not now. Well, not right now. 180 countries have been recommended we don't go to. There's nowhere to go right now. But that will change. So I'm just saying, look, this is just a digital form of something we've been doing forever. It's not tyranny. It's just another form of identification. And we've had it for years. I used to run a visa service. We had to prove that people had cholera, yellow fever, malaria shots, all that stuff. And it's not going to restrict your freedom in the US. It's not going to be used for domestic travel or restaurants or anything else. But there are places where corporations have the right to say no shirt, no shot, no service. They have that right. And, they won't do it if they lose too much business. They will do it if they can pack their stadium.
Right.
So it's important that they be secure and they be accurate, and you accept paper as well. I mean, the ACLU says they should be paper first. No, 86% of Americans have a smartphone. Let's make it smartphone first, but paper is acceptable, right? The ACLU said it should never connect with the government. Well, then it won't work very well when you go to France or anywhere else, and you're going to have to show the paper anyway. So come on, let's be realistic. It should be secure and private and widely available and free. So that's all I'm doing, is trying to work with travel organizations and governments to get this moving, because there are 8-hour lines at Heathrow right now. 8 hours. They're checking everything manually. The US isn't doing that. The US is putting it all on the airlines. So if the airline checks you coming into the US, you're in. There's no double check. Look, the vaccine is a wonderful thing for those who can take it. It made me get on an airplane yesterday and go to a meeting and travel with confidence. And so hopefully people can, and some people don't. I get it. But hopefully enough people will that we can end this thing.
Right.
But it's going to happen again. We'll have something different. So
no doubt it'll happen again. I think part of the resistance that people have, Terry, is most people at least in the United States, grew up with most of these restrictions, these badges, these certifications, these licenses, all baked in to the paradigm, whether it's a driver's license or a passport, or we grew up with these. And maybe a lot of people in this country, the vaccine passport, that might be the first time that they've been required to do something that they think inhibits their freedom and their rights.
Yeah.
Because it's been a long time since we had to do something like this. But there's a lot of it already in play, right? You can't drive a car without a driver's license.
I remember when seatbelts came out, and I went with my dad and we looked at the seatbelts, and the car dealer said, well, we can put them under the seat. Don't worry about it.
Right.
I always used one. I mean, it's like helmets. People wear them now. What's amazing about this vaccine is basically they built it in software. The Chinese released the DNA profile about a month out. 2 months later, we had the vaccine. Now, we had to test it for a year, but they figured it out. And now this same mRNA is going after cancer.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. At least we're catching up to the viruses that are coming out in a new way, because if we had to wait 6 or 7 years, I mean,
we'd be in big trouble.
Break down, and we would have millions of people dead, millions more.
Most of the people that watch this or listen to this podcast are entrepreneurs, and we talked about a lot of fascinating things. I want to make sure my entrepreneurs get a nugget or two. And I know you have a couple besides the 72 that are in your book. Can you drop a couple of nuggets on this audience? Like if you could boil down everything you've learned in the last 50 years in business and networking and people and yourself, what's the most important thing you've learned that when you implemented it, big things happened?
Well, look, I think for entrepreneurs, if you're thinking about your company and build your company, I would say, don't hire your best friend, hire the best person. As a VC, the first thing we look at is the team. The team is more important than the idea because the idea will change. What you think is going to happen isn't going to happen exactly as you think it's going to happen. So that wonderful up and to the right chart you have in the Excel spreadsheet is all BS. It's about the team and it's about your flexibility and ability to change along the way because it's a curvy road to success. There's no straight road to success. And so having the right team, having the right idea is important. And then as I look at all these decks of all these companies, it's like then a miracle occurs. We have 1 million customers. Well, how do you get them? They seem to leave out the customer attraction page. It's critical. And in some cases, it takes a lot of money. In other cases, it doesn't. But, how you're going to do it. I reviewed a deck yesterday morning. It was for a medical device company. And they really didn't have that page. But they had it down. They figured out it was a B2B business. They'd already hired some very experienced older bag carriers who knew everybody in the medical device business. Okay, that's fine. If you're a consumer product, maybe it's something else. At Kayak, it was search. At Travelocity, it was consumer advertising. How are you going to get those people in there? Because there are only a couple of Airbnbs and Teslas where they don't have to advertise because it's so good. It just becomes viral. It's very rare. And I think, continuous experimentation and taking risk. At Kayak, 20% of what you see every day is a test. We are constantly testing, generally failing, but continuously learning. So the customer in these cloud-connected apps or in cloud-connected products, they're constantly telling you what they like and don't like. There's a wonderful story in Wired about a guy, Hasidic Jewish guy in New York, one of those electronics shops on 3rd Avenue. Yeah. And he's called the Amazon Whisperer. So he reads the bad reviews of electronic products and then fixes them. So he goes through and said, I can make a better shower radio. I just fix all that stuff and bring it out. Said, hey, it doesn't leak, doesn't do this, doesn't do that. So, he's winning by listening. Continuous customer feedback is so critical, particularly in startups, because you're not going to get it right out of the gate. It just isn't going to work. The Tesla Roadster is nothing like the Model 3. These products all evolved radically. But you have to have the vision to push forward, to keep your principles clear. Steve Jobs' idea was 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that became the iPod. And who wants 1,000 songs in your pocket? Well, sometimes you have to lead the consumer along. You have to hang in with your products for a while. Sometimes you're too early. I spent $1 million at Travelocity creating fare-driven availability. So rather than say, I want to go on July 1st, you'd see the ad for the $100 fare. You could click it, and it would show you what day you could actually get the $100 fare, because you could never do that when you called the airline. Newspapers loved it. Nobody used it. Wow. Nobody. Today, every airline has one. Well, sometimes you're too early. If you're flexible and you have the right team who has the courage of their convictions, you can be successful.
What's the biggest mistake you've made, Terry? Either a one-time blunder or a bad habit?
I think not terminating people soon enough. Seeing performance that just wasn't going to change. And in this one case at Travelocity, I did hire a friend and he couldn't keep up, and he was a friend. And I didn't, nobody ever says, well, I fired him too soon. You don't say I fired him too late.
Right.
So I think, having the courage to make that decision to say, let us help you do something else is real important, particularly in a small team. And it's very hard to do, particularly if you hired your friends, which is one reason I try not to do that anymore. I think that can be a real mistake, and you won't listen well enough. And I now try to listen well enough. And sometimes it's just luck. Expedia brought out air, car, hotel combined in a dynamic package at a discounted price. They doubled their sales in 2 quarters. We were off doing cruises. Well, their thing was better. Nobody knew in those days. So that was maybe part smarts and a lot of luck. And it takes a lot of luck in the entrepreneurial business.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And the more shots you fire, the more likely are you to hit something.
Well, that's why VC companies know only 25% of my companies will even not die, much less make me $1 billion. So it's a very, very narrow pyramid at the top. And I interviewed a company the other day where they're raising $1 million, and the guy said, that's all we need to get to profitability. Should we go talk to VCs? I said, hell no. The VCs will make you exit. If you can get $1 million from friends and family, you'll have a choice. You can pay dividends, and that could be your family business, because it's only going to be, that business is only going to be about a $25 or $30 million business. So VCs wouldn't care anyway. So don't take their money because they want to exit. Now, if you think you're going to be $1 billion business, they do too. Yeah, take their money all day long. But it's changing so fast between private equity and SPACs. SPACs are almost over.
Right. That happened quick.
Around for 6 months. I was asked to be in a board of a SPAC, and a month later I said, too late, never mind.
Right.
So, the world is changing very, very quickly, and you really have to keep your ear to the ground and experiment and know that you're going to fail. But if you here's another one, is kill projects, not people. If Terry gets blamed for the product failure, Terry ain't ever going to take a chance again. And neither is anybody else.
Right.
And most likely it was the idea that failed, but you learned something. So move on. Now, if I fail 5 times, then kick me to the minor leagues. I get it. But you should just say, hey, we learned something. What did we learn? Dissect why you failed, learn, move on, try again. Edison said, I never failed, but I found 1,000 light bulbs that didn't work. Right? So,
Terry, what you're doing now, besides serving on boards and looking at the next big Travelocity or kayak, is you're doing a lot of speaking and writing. Where can people best follow you and find you?
First of all, tbjones.com. T as in Tom, B as in boy, Jones.com. Terry Jones will take you to Monty Python, so don't go there. And there you can buy books, and you can really see a lot of different videos. There is a video there about entrepreneurship, about my journey, and it's done in the context of why startups fail, the top 10 reasons why they fail. So they can do that there. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, of course, and I'd be happy to come and speak. I've become a pretty accomplished virtual speaker. I built a studio in my house and did 47 virtual speeches last year, and they're not the little guy in the corner of Zoom. They're sophisticated video productions that people say it's like being there. And I really think going forward, yesterday the meeting planner said, well, our business is to bring people together at a hotel. I said, well, you're nuts. Your business is to create connections between people that have results. How that happens is changing, guys. You better not reject video meetings because CFOs love them. Yeah,
the attendance goes up tenfold and the cost goes down tenfold.
Exactly. And even virtual trade shows work like crazy. They had good results. It's changing, folks. So I said, why don't you step back and particularly for corporate meetings, say, okay, what's the result they want? And what's the right way to be that? It might be, hey, the Europeans go to Paris, the Asians go to Tokyo, everybody else goes to Denver, and we connect them when we need to. Or it might be all virtual. Or if you're a trade association, maybe it is about getting together because you're making decisions in a way that you need all the people there, or some of them. You got to change.
Well, Terry, you are a fascinating listen and watch. I could listen to you all day. You have a million stories and a million lessons. I'm excited to dive into the second book, Disruption. You and DeWitt are the first brothers I've ever interviewed, which is pretty. You guys each have a fascinating story, and I look forward to connecting next time you come to Hawaii.
Well, it's been a great pleasure to be with you, Richard. Thank you so much.
You bet, Terry. And thank all of you for listening. Remember, share this with your team, share it with your network. Curiosity leads to education. Education leads to a better life. Thanks for tuning in to the Authentic Networker. We'll catch you next time.